The Great Depression was one of the biggest national traumas ever faced by the Americans. It stripped away jobs, homes, and financial security. It brought entire industries to a standstill and scattered families across the country in search of survival.
A century before, 500,000 people had gone west on these same trails looking for hope.
But even in the harshest moments, Americans found some incredible survival mechanisms. And one of these was music.
With peace and glory ahead.
Music held people together and gave voice to their trauma when the systems around them had failed them, while breadlines stretched for blocks and dust storms darkened the sky. Songs rose from radios, church pews, union halls, and front porches.
There was an old zany who lived in a tub. He had so many fleas.
This wasn't music in the modern sense, where you pop in your headphones while you work. It wasn't some background noise to give added stimulation. It was how people coped, how they healed, and how they made sense of the chaos around them. It was music in the true artistic sense of the word. Today, we're exploring how music helped a struggling nation stay on its feet, how voices and songs kept hope alive. Music as emotional survival. For millions of Americans, the 1930s were marked by anxiety, grief, and relentless uncertainty. People lost their livelihoods almost overnight. Banks collapsed, families packed into jalopies and hit the road, all chasing rumors of
500,000 people had gone west on these same trails looking for hope.
In this landscape of loss, music became an emotional survival mechanism. It provided something that the government, the markets, and even the churches often couldn't, a space for emotional truth. Songs gave people permission to cry, to remember, to imagine a better life.
Changing the weather, changing the sea.
It was no coincidence that many popular tunes of the era revolved around themes of home, love, and longing, like I'll Never Smile Again by Ruth Lowe, famously recorded by Tommy Dorsey and a young Frank Sinatra in 1939. That song, filled with melancholy, spoke to the collective pains of the generation. In living rooms, battered radios hummed softly as families gathered around for comfort, and in migrant camps across California, laborers strummed guitars and sang into the wind to forget their pains. Collective healing through sound. Music had a collective element to it. It brought entire communities together. When music was shared, healing was shared too. Whether it was neighbors gathering for a Sunday hymn sing, or crowds swaying together at barn dance, music gave people a sense of unity that poverty couldn't erase. Church services often featured music as the centerpiece, the one moment in the week where spirits could lift freely. In coal towns, brass bands still marched. In farming communities, fiddlers played on porches long into the night. And on the airwaves, voices from afar became part of daily life. The radio was one of the few items families clung to during the Depression, even if it meant going without something else. Shows like the Grand Ole Opry, which broadcast live from Nashville, connected rural listeners across state lines. People in Arkansas, Iowa, and Georgia could hear the same steel guitar wail and feel the same joy or sorrow in unison. Radio transformed music into a national balm, making healing a collective art, transforming economic pain into artistic expression. Whenever humans are caught up in emotional pain, they find ways to channel the inner anger into something productive. And out of that productivity, sometimes beautiful things emerge. Artists use their pain as the fuel for their musical expression, forging songs that spoke directly to the struggles of ordinary Americans. For example, Woody Guthrie, one of the era's most prolific and iconic songwriters, famously rode the rails with migrant workers. His guitar scrawled with the words, "This machine kills fascists." His songs weren't abstract or metaphorical. They were vivid, grounded, and often deeply political.
There's a great and a bloody fight round this whole world tonight.
In I Ain't Got No Home in This World Anymore, Guthrie channeled the voice of a dispossessed.
I ain't got no home, I'm just a roaming round.
Blending economic desperation into lyrical poetry. His lyrics offered validation to the troubled masses instead of cheap escapism. Other artists, like the folk blues troubadour Josh White, sang of racial injustice and labor exploitation in ways that electrified listeners who had never heard their own experiences sung back to them. Even jazz musicians channeled the spirit of resistance. Duke Ellington's Harlem Speaks and Billie Holiday's early performances carried emotional undertones of racial pride and defiance. For these artists, music was the channel through which they worked their civil rights activism. Cultural resilience and musical storytelling. Music during the Great Depression also involved a lot of storytelling. In a time when newspapers cost money and books became a luxury for many, songs served as the cultural record. Folk ballads in particular carried the stories of the working class, the forgotten, and the invisible. They spoke of dust storms that buried farms and strikes that ended in bloodshed. People remembered events not from textbooks, but from verses. Florence Reese, a miner's wife in Kentucky, penned the haunting "Which Side Are You On?" after her home was ransacked by anti-union forces.
Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell.
The song spread through labor camps and union halls like wildfire. Its message wasn't subtle. It was a direct call to choose a side in a nation divided by class and crisis. Ballads like The Ballad of Pretty Boy Floyd, also by Guthrie, humanized outlaws while criticizing corrupt banks. Blues narratives. In the African American communities of the South and Midwest, the blues took on new urgency during the Depression. The blues genre has existed since the post-Reconstruction era, but in the 1930s, their relevance deepened. The blues gave form to often unspeakable pains: the ache of racism, the sting of poverty, and the frustration of crushed ambitions. Artists like Bessie Smith, even as her career declined with the onset of the Depression, remained a powerful voice. Her song, "Nobody Knows You When You're Down and Out," became an unofficial anthem of the decade. Blind Lemon Jefferson's eerie guitar work and wailing voice turned sidewalks into sacred space.
Only one kind favor I ask of you.
And Robert Johnson, with his haunting recordings made in makeshift hotel rooms and repurposed warehouses, blended myth and misery together in songs like Crossroad Blues.
I went to the crossroads, fell down on my knees.
Folk music as resistance. If blues was the sound of survival, folk music was the sound of rebellion. Folk musicians didn't just sing about hardship, they also challenged the structures behind it. The Depression sparked a folk revival that positioned music as a weapon in the fight for justice. Almanac Singers, a group that included Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie, used their harmonies to support labor strikes and anti-fascist causes. Their songs addressed everything from corporate exploitation to looming war in Europe. Union meetings often began with music. Organizers found that a song could rally people in ways that speeches couldn't. Folk songs could be adapted to new causes, new towns, and new enemies. One verse could be swapped out for another, depending on the situation. This flexibility made folk music not only powerful, but timeless. It gave people a way to voice dissent without needing a platform, and it gave communities a soundtrack for organizing. Radio and recorded music. Even as the recording industry shrank under the weight of economic collapse, radio stations and small labels found ways to keep music alive. Between 1930 and 1935, record sales plummeted by nearly 90%, but technology and necessity worked together to reshape the industry. The invention of the electrical microphone and the rise of cheaper pressing methods allowed recording companies to keep producing, though in more niche markets. Race records and hillbilly records, problematic terms by modern standards, referred to music by African American and rural white artists respectively, and they became popular among communities starved for representation. The Carter family, with their Appalachian, gospel-infused sound, recorded songs like "Keep on the Sunny Side,"
dark and the troubled side of life,
offering gentle resilience to families with little else to cling to. Their scratchy records played on wind-up phonographs in remote corners of the country. Meanwhile, powerful radio stations on the Mexican border, like XERA, began to broadcast country, blues, and gospel across half the United States. circumventing U.S. broadcasting regulations and giving voice to a wider range of musical styles. Prominent musical artists during the Great Depression. The music of the Great Depression was driven by authenticity rather than celebrity. Still, several artists emerged from whose influence transcend that era. Woody Guthrie became the bard of the Dust Bowl, expressing the lives of ordinary Americans into song. Bessie Smith remained a towering figure in blues even after her tragic death in 1937. The Carter family laid the foundation for modern country music, blending faith, love, and hardship in ways that resonated across generations. Leadbelly, with his booming voice and 12-string guitar, brought prison songs and work chants into the public consciousness. Billie Holiday rose in the late 1930s as a jazz vocalist with unmatched emotional depth, singing ballads that turned private anguish into universal art. Duke Ellington, meanwhile, kept his big band swinging through the darkest years, proving that elegance and artistry could still flourish amid economic ruin. Each of these artists helped shape the sound of survival. The Great Depression shook the nation, but through the pain, Americans kept singing. Music turned struggle into strength and gave people hope. If the story moved you, like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more powerful lessons from American history. Thanks for watching, and remember, the past still has a voice.